everyone. Welcome to Victory Church Online. This week, we continued our series, The Abundant Life, as Pastor Jonathan Cyprowski, our executive pastor, spoke on the test.
So, we're in a series called Abundant Life. And last week, we kind of jumped into what that means. Are you excited about what an abundant life really is? I'm so pumped up about living the abundant life. I'm so pumped about living the life that God said that we could, and I hear songs like we just sang, and I'll be honest, that song means a whole lot to me.
Yeah, me too.
That song was the one of the songs at my father-in-law's funeral. He served the Lord for about 30 years in ministry, doing various things from being a missionary to senior pastoring a church to youth pastoring. And those words so directly fit his life and who he was and what he did. And every time I hear that song, I think about the legacy of ministry. I think about the legacy that we have. Can you imagine the people that we come behind? The people that we get to serve behind, that laid a trail, that said, this is the way to do it, and this is why. Isn't that an amazing opportunity? There are names, and there are people like Lenny Weston, and Bill Bierman, and Mario Latini, and all of these people that you've probably never heard their names, but to me, they're the whole reason I stand before you today. They've taught me a principle. They've taught me principles that I still carry. Pastor Lenny Weston was like my spiritual dad. And it was kind of funny because I used to call him Pops, and I'd take him out for Father's Day and stuff like that. But you have to understand something about Pops. He was 300 pounds and African American as they come. So every time I'd call him Pops, everybody would kind of look at me kind of funny and go, oh yeah, are you adopted? Or, what's going on there? I can tell you this. Every time I pray, I still hear his voice praying with me. Because he took me into hours of prayer and travail where we realized the power of God and what he was doing. And I learned to live the abundant life through these men and women of God who weren't afraid to do everything that the Bible said that they could do and had everything that the Bible said they could have. That's the abundant life, and I'm pumped about it. Are you? So here's what I want to do. Last week we talked about that green pasture, right? We talked about being beside the still waters and what all those things meant. And if you missed last week, man, get on the app. It's on there. Check it out. There's a pretty handsome guy on there, and he's talking all about it. All right? But in the meantime, I want to take you into that pasture today. I want to give you a principle to live by that could change your entire life. And I'm telling you what, if you operate in this, it's never going to be the same for you. Are you ready for it? All right, here we go. This is what it is. It's called the test. The test. Have you ever walked into a classroom? Now, I liked school. I was pretty good at school, but I was the kind of guy that when I went to school, I only took the book home on the first week of school to cover it for extra credit. I didn't take it home to study. Okay, and I did okay, but I said, man, I'm going to try to earn a football scholarship, and so, I'm going to put all my time and attention into something like that. And God was gracious to me, and I was able to do that, but what I learned through all of that was that sometimes you were a little underprepared when you needed to be the most prepared, and you'd walk into class. Tell me if you've ever been through this before. You walk into class, and you see people looking really stressed out. Books are open on the desk. People aren't joking around like they normally are, and they ask you a question. It goes something like this. Are you ready?
Yes, sir, I'm ready.
For what? The test. What test? And then you proceed to sit down and panic because you know something. You had no idea it was coming, and chances are pretty good you were going to fail. Have you ever been there? Anybody else fail a test because they didn't know it was coming or they forgot all about it? Well, listen, there's hope today. I need to tell you something. There is a test that God gives all of us, but he not only gives us the test, but he prepares us for the test. And today, I'm going to give you the cheat sheet. I'm going to give you the answers to the test. Are you ready for it? Okay. Here's how it works. All right. The first thing we have to know is, one, we have to know who's giving the test. Who's giving the test? Now, when I was in college, I learned how to study. And I found this out. The more I knew about the professor, the better I did on the test. And here's the reason why. Sometimes you'd have a professor and she was a little bit lazy, right? And she wanted really, really good student opinion surveys at the end of the semester because that's how professors get their bonuses when they're in school, right? So she would give stuff like true and false questions, multiple choice. Anybody like those kind of tests? And I knew how to prepare for those kind of tests. It was really simple. If you knew the term and you somewhat knew what it did, you were going to be okay and you were probably going to get a good grade on the test. But then you'd get a real tough guy who probably wrote. Now, anybody ever have a professor that actually wrote the textbook that you were studying that semester? What did you find out in that class? You're not going to get an A even if you want to. And here's the reason why. He knew every nuance. He knew every tone. He knew everything about that textbook. And I had professors that actually prided themselves that you could not get a 100% on a test or a quiz in their class because they were going to word at least one question in some weird way that it was impossible for you to get, and you were going to miss it on a technicality because they wanted to be the toughest professor. Now, I've been known to be that professor every once in a while, but I never gave them a question they couldn't answer, okay? And so as we're looking at all of this, I got to tell you about the professor, the one who's giving us the test. And here's the thing. He wants you to pass the test. He wants you to get a 100%. He wants you to not only have the 4.0 GPA, but he wants you to have all the benefits of having learned it all because you're walking in it. And see, what I realized after I graduated college was this. The professors that were my hardest were the ones that I ended up doing the best in life from the content they had taught me because there was this one principle that most of them walked in. They had been a professional in that area before, and they wanted to protect that profession. And so they were harder on us so that we had to learn it so that we could actually use it and apply it. Today, here's what God says. We're going to be in Malachi chapter 3. I'm going to start in verse 6. I'll be in New King James all morning long in case you're pulling it up on YouVersion or one of the apps. But let's take a look here, okay? So before we study for the test, let's look at exactly who's giving the test. Malachi chapter 3, verse 6, it says this, "For I am the Lord, I do not change." Okay, so what did he just tell us here? He's God and he doesn't change. Okay, so what does that mean? Listen, God's perfect. All right? In order for him to change, that would mean that he could improve on perfection, right? So he's not going to change. Why? Because God can't get any better than he already is. And if he changed, it would be him admitting that he could get better. And God can't get any better than the God he is. Why? Because he's the source of all wisdom and understanding, our Bible says. And so we know this according to all of that. His character doesn't change. His personhood doesn't change. We know who he is. And your Bible says that he was the same yesterday, today, and forever. What's that mean? That what he said was good enough for yesterday, it's good enough for today. And guess what? Tomorrow, the rules aren't going to change. Okay, so that's who's talking. Just want to lay it out there for you. Are you ready? All right, so I am the Lord, I do not change. Therefore, you are not consumed. I think that's pretty funny. He basically said, listen, I was kind in the beginning, I'm still kind now, and that's why you're not dead over this. Yet from the days of your father, you have gone away from my ordinances and have not kept them. Now, what is an ordinance? I think we get this word kind of confused, okay? The word ordinance comes from the root word ordinary, okay? So if you get a letter in the mail or a notice in the mail over an ordinance, your HOA is probably upset with you about cutting your grass, okay? Anybody ever get one of those letters? No? I'm the only one? Liars. All right, so here's what happens. Why do they send you that notice? Because there's an ordinance that says this. What an ordinance really means is that it's a principle of ordinary behavior. And so when you get that notice in the mail, they're saying that you are not acting according to the principle of ordinary behavior to live in your neighborhood or in your city. Because if you were, you would cut your grass, right? Does that make sense? So what God's talking about is something that's a principle that doesn't change. This is what we do, and we continue to do it because this is what the ordinary believer does. And listen, when you're a believer, there's nothing ordinary about you. You walk in the extraordinary, and that's your ordinary, right? So when you say, man, the blessings of God are chasing me down, you better know what that means. Because you're following the principles of God. What you're saying is, I'm operating in what the Bible says I should, and so this is chasing me down. Okay, now here's where he goes on to say, verse 7, return to me, and I'll return to you, says the Lord of hosts. Who's the Lord of hosts? The God that does not change. But you said, in what way shall we return? And now listen, before I get into this next part, I need you to understand something, okay? Because I'm about to clue you in on what the test is. But here's the thing. A preacher didn't make this up. Okay? I didn't make this up. Pastor Mike didn't make this up. The guy that was on TV that tried to sell you a gallon of water that said it would heal you from the inside out didn't make this up. This came from the God who doesn't change. Okay? And so as we're looking at this, please understand that this principle will save your life and your finances if you understand it. Now, this is what he says in verse 8. Will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? In tithes and in offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me. Even the whole nation has robbed me. Now, let me stop a second and say this. He didn't say, I am cursing you. God didn't say he's cursing you here. What he's saying is that you have to remember what we talked about last week with Adam and how he broke covenant with God. And as soon as he stepped out of the covenant of God, what happened? He lost his dominion, right? Isn't that right? Do you guys remember that? Okay, so listen, what he's saying is that you've broke my covenant, and because of that, you're walking under the same curse that Adam was walking under. Does that make sense? It's quiet in the room. I feel like you know what's coming. It's okay. Breathe, all right? This is really going to help you. It changed my whole life. Wait till I tell you what it did for me, okay? All right, now listen, let's finish reading. Now, here we go. When he says that you've robbed me, this is what he's saying now. It's not that you stole from me, but he actually uses the word robbed 4 times. 4 times he says this. Now, why does he use the word robbed me? There's a difference between stealing and robbing. Okay? Here's the difference. When you steal something, you sneak into somebody's house and you take something without them knowing about it. God didn't say that. He said you robbed me, which means you did what? When you rob someone, you take what was someone else's from them physically. So what God said is you walked into my house and you took the money out of my pocket.
Yes.
Yikes.
Yeah, get a hold of that. That's right.
I don't want to rob God. How can I rob God? I mean, we're talking about the God that does not change. This is like, Jehovah God we're talking about. And as we see this from him, what he's saying is that, look, I'm asking you now to change what you're doing, to refrain from the actions that we originally had, and to begin to walk in this one thing. And it says this, bring all the tithes into the storehouse. What's the storehouse? The house of God. Okay, the house of God, that there may be food in my house. One thing that I hear all the time out in the lobby when people come and say hi is, man, we're so excited. We get fed at Victory Church. We get fed at Victory Church. There's food in this house. And we have one of the greatest pastors in America. Pastor Mike's not here today, so I get to brag on him a little bit. Do you know who this man really is? He'll never tell you this, but hundreds of pastors around the world actually get coached by this man.
Yes, that's right.
Does anybody know who Pastor Robert Morris is?
Yes.
That's Pastor Mike's his coach. Okay? And many guys who are running churches of tens of thousands of people. And this man brings a word to us every week. We need to know who's up here from week to week. This man has got it going on, and he knows what he's talking about. I'm telling you, we are a blessed people. But what I'm going to tell you is this. Our tithes and what we do directly affects the food that's in the house. Do you know that sometimes God will hold back certain things that are in his word because collectively we're not operating in what he's asked us to do? That's crazy. So next time I'm really bad at this, you'll know why. You didn't give your offering. I'm kidding. And listen, if you're not tithing, that doesn't make you a bad person. Hear me say that. Is everybody hearing that? My mama was a preschool teacher, so I heard this a lot. Put your listening ears on. You're not a bad person, but you're putting yourself in a really bad place as far as being able to walk in the blessing of God. Okay? Now, look what he says, because this is the only time in your Bible that God says, test me. Are you ready? Here's what he says. Bring all the tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and try me now in this. What does that mean? That word actually means the same as test or prove when it comes to the principle of testing precious metals like gold or silver to test their purity. So what he's saying is, literally, test me in this and see if I'm pure in this area. And this is what he says he'll do. That I would not open the windows of heaven and pour out for you such blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it. And, all right, this is kind of like one of those guys that gets on TV and tells you, you can have all this right now. And if you call right now, right, here's God saying, you don't just get this, but watch this. I will rebuke the devourer for your sake. Wouldn't you like it if God just rebuked the enemy for you? Yes. People who are tithing, the protection of God comes on you and begins to thwart the act of the enemy, because what he wants to do is get you so stressed out that circumstances begin happening in your life, and all of a sudden it shifts your focus from what? God to God's provision and whether or not it's there. But when he puts his hand on your finances, all of a sudden the things that have been holding you back are no longer there. Isn't that good? That's an amazing thing. So as we continue to look at what he's saying here, we look at it and say, man, God, what is it that you're asking me to do? Now, let me unpack it for you. Are you ready? Here we go. Tithing is a test. Tithing is a test of our hearts. Pastor Mike laid that out for us in the first week about the heart, right? But what we see here is the word in Hebrew, tithe, means tenth. It's a tenth part or 10%. All right, so 10 in the Bible represents testing, okay? So we see this over and over and over again. Every time we see the number 10, there's some kind of test around it. Are you familiar with this? Watch, let me ask you a couple questions. You answer me out loud. Do it nice and loud. Are you ready for this? How many plagues were there in Egypt? 10, right. Another way to say that is, how many times did God test Pharaoh's heart? How many commandments are there? How many days did Jesus tell them to wait in the upper room? Now, I don't know, you might not know the answers to all of these, but you might realize there's a pattern here. Okay? So let's try it again. A little bit louder now. You ready for this? How many times did God test Israel in the wilderness? How many times were Jacob's wages changed? How many days was Daniel tested? Come on, a little louder now. How many virgins were tested in Matthew 25? How many days of testing are mentioned in Revelation? How many disciples are there? 12. I was just testing you. All right, now look, I'm trying to make it a little bit lighter here, but I got to ask you, okay? You see all these numbers of 10, they're all about being tested, and what God's really looking at, every time we saw these areas of testing, what we saw was that God was after someone's heart, right? And so what we get is the opportunity to determine who we're going to worship with what God gives us every time we get paid. How many people get paid once a week? Can I see your hands? Once a week. All right. How many people? Now I'm taking notes. I have Nicole over here. She's writing this down. How many people get paid every 2 weeks? I'm kidding. She's not writing it down. Good. How many people get paid every month? How many people never get paid at all? Half the room. Okay, so here's what we're looking at. Pastor, I don't get paid. How am I supposed to tithe? What we're looking at, though, is that a lot of people have some silly arguments about what tithing is. All right? Silly arguments. I want to talk about two of those, and then I want to get into what the actual blessing of tithing is. Okay? Can we do that? Y'all with me? All right, lean in. Here it comes. Here's the first argument I typically hear. Pastor, I can't be cursed. I'm a believer. Well, okay. Jesus bore the curse on the cross for me. That's what I typically hear, right? But what happens now is we have to understand, did Jesus go to the cross and break the curse of sin and death? Yes, he did. But here's the thing. Have you ever sinned? Yes. Ooh. So wait a minute. He bore your sin on the cross, but you've still sinned. Yes. Okay, I get it now. All right. All right. So let me ask you another question then. Have you ever been sick? But didn't Jesus take your sickness to the cross? So we have to understand that we live in a cursed world. We live in a sinful world, and we have a sinful nature. And every day we allow the Spirit of God to make us more like Him and to walk in those principles. Does that make sense? So what happens here is we oftentimes see where everybody say, oh man, you know, Jonathan, I can't be cursed because I'm a believer. Actually, that's hogwash. You can be as cursed as you allow yourself to be. Not God. Me and you get to choose whether or not we're cursed. There's a guy that was in the Bible. His name was Balaam. Anybody familiar with Balaam? Balaam was so dumb, he had to have a donkey talk to him. Okay? So just to lay it out there, I'm about that dumb sometimes that I need God to just turn the donkey's voice on so that I can understand a little better. All right? So let's break it down to that side of things. Balaam considered himself to be a prophet. But what he was really involved with was this thing called witchcraft. And so a king from another nation came to him and said, I want you to curse the Israelites. And he said, how much are you going to give me? Because his heart was in the wrong place. Balaam knew who God was, had served God, but now all of a sudden money had become his God. And so what did he do? He said, how much will you give me to curse the people of God? Now, he went out there and tried to curse them, and here's what happened. This is crazy. He could not curse them because they were under the protection of God, because they had just walked through these very things that I'm describing to you. Now, here's what happened. He went back and told the king, I can't curse them. He said, why can't you curse them? He said, because I cannot curse what God has blessed. And so the king said, how might I get around that? And he said, the only way that I can curse what God has blessed is if the one that is blessed allows it. Meaning what? He had to get them into a place where they went into sin and stepped out of the covering of God so that he could curse them. What Balaam found out is he couldn't do it. And his donkey had to stop him before the angel decided to take him out with a sword of fire. Isn't that crazy? I mean, that story is absolutely nuts. You got to read that and check it out. But that's the very principle that we're actually arguing against and saying, you know, Pastor Jonathan, I can't be cursed because I'm a believer. It's actually not true if you allow yourself to. Now, here's the other one I hear, and this is the big one. I don't tithe because tithing is part of the law, and I'm not under the law. I'm under grace. Okay, so let me see if I can make this one work. Okay. Have you ever heard it said that we shouldn't walk in adultery? That pretty fair? Where did that come from? It came from the Ten Commandments. Where's the Ten Commandments? In the law. So what happens is if I'm under grace, that makes it okay for me. So now I can walk in adultery. Is that true? Don't look at your wife right now. She's looking at you. If that's true, then nothing that's in the law ever applies again, which means this: thou shalt not murder, and now I can murder somebody. Is that true? No, it's not true. But where did we find that? In the law, right? And we continue to walk through all of these things and see this for what it is, and what we actually come to realize is that the law still applies. Now, how do you get that, Pastor Jonathan? I'm so glad you asked. Let me tell you. Are you ready for this? All right. Jesus said this now in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17. He said, do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I didn't come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot nor one little tittle will by no means pass from the law until it is all fulfilled. All fulfilled. Meaning what? The law hasn't passed away, it's simply changed. Now look what Jesus goes on to say in verse 19. Whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men to do so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now, this is really important. Verse 20. For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, what was the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees? The law. The law, right? So now what this tells us is that righteousness of grace always exceeds the righteousness of the law. So look at the next verse, verse 21. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of judgment. Where does it say that again? In the law, right? But here's what Jesus says. I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the same judgment. So just the thought of murder is now what Jesus is calling wrong. But the law didn't say, he didn't say murder. He says don't even be angry. So grace requires more than the law. Do you see that? Okay, so look further on. He says this. He says, if a man even looks at a woman to lust after her, he's committed adultery in his heart. Not the act of it, but even the thought of it. So what he's saying is the law says don't do it, but grace says don't even think about it. Is this all right? You learning anything here? So when we look at the law, we're not looking at the law as something that's passed away. We're actually looking at the law and saying, listen, this is great. So somebody that says to me, well, Pastor, I'm under grace, not under the law. I'm looking at them and going, so great, you give more than 10%? That's awesome. Because if you're really under grace, you understand something. See, Paul said this, I hear this a lot. Well, Pastor, it's okay for me to smoke weed, or it's okay for me to do some of these things, and it's okay. Well, and because I have grace. But see, Paul said, because grace abounds, should sin therefore? Absolutely not. Why does he say that to us? Because see, when you realize what grace costs, it drives you to a life of holiness. Because the same Jesus who resurrected on Sunday morning was the same Jesus that took my beating. He's the same Jesus that took those nails on the cross. He's the same Jesus that bled and died for me, unlike anyone else was ever willing to do. And because of that, I don't take that grace lightly, and I don't spend it on frivolous things. But I look at it and say, because of your grace, help me to live holy before you, that I might show other people who you are and what you are, and live like you, and act like you, and be like you. Why? Because you've done so much for me. The least I could do is point to you.
Yes, come on. That's good.
This stuff's fun. It really is. All right, last thing here I'm going to get into. Are you ready? Tithing is biblical. Tithing is biblical. Now, I want to show you something. I'm not going to run down through all these scriptures, but if you want these notes, feel free. Send us an email. Let me know. I will back this up for you 30 ways from Sunday. But I could point all the way back to 1,200 years before the law, the first time that somebody tithed. Look at this first one with me. This is Genesis 14, 18 through 20. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High, and he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abraham of God Most High. And he blessed him and said this again, Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And then Abraham gave him a tithe of all his spoil. So Abraham gave Melchizedek and the church 10% of what he had taken in spoil. And this is 500 years before the law. 500 years. Tithing's been going on by our spiritual fathers long before any of us could ever known what the law was. We could keep going down all of these different things. We could see that Jacob actually set up a monument after God had spoken to him, called the place Bethel, which means what? Where the presence of God resides, and poured oil on it and continued to covenant with God that he would give him 10% of everything that God blessed him with, if God would simply protect him. That's 250 years before the law. We could keep going down this line on and on and on and see all of the places where this worked. But let me ask you a question, because everybody will go, okay, but that's the Old Testament now, Pastor. You thinking that yet? Uh-oh. Now let me ask you a question. If Jesus himself told you to tithe, would you do it? That took some of you way too long. If Jesus himself, I'll ask these people over here, they look more saved. If Jesus himself told you to tithe, would you do it? Yes. Now, let me show it to you. Dun, 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 dun. Here it comes, all right? Jesus says this. Now, this is him talking in Matthew chapter 23, starting verse 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. What did he just say? He said, you do tithe, and you should, but don't forget the weightier things too. That's Jesus right there talking. If this was the only verse in the Bible about tithing, I would tithe. Because this is Jesus who gave all to rescue me from a life of sin and death. And he said I should do it. Buddy, I'm doing it.
Yes, sir.
There's 3 people in here ready to get blessed. Did you hear that? Okay, so let me tell you this. Tithing is a benefit. Tithing is a benefit. How so? Let me tell you a little story real quick, and I'm going to wrap this up. Are you ready? There's a king named Hezekiah. Okay, this is in 2 Chronicles chapter 31. Hezekiah takes over the whole kingdom, and he realizes, man, we're in really bad shape, because the previous kings had allowed people to build high places and temples to worship and bring offerings to false gods. And so his first act as king is to start tearing down the high places and the way people were worshiping other gods, and he was destroying it all. But he realized that the nation was under a curse, and he couldn't figure out what it was or why. And then as he was reading the scripture, the Lord led him to this very thing, that the people of God had stopped tithing to the house of God and had begun bringing their offerings and everything that they were offering to false gods in these high places. So what did he ask them to do? Start bringing your tithes and your offerings into the storehouse, into the temple. Here's where we'll pick up the story. Watch what happens. He tells them, bring 10%, and the people bring 10% of everything. The fruit of the land, all of the sheep, all of the donkeys, everything that comes. They're bringing 10%, and they just keep bringing it in. Hezekiah comes a few months later to inspect whether or not the people had been tithing, and he sees everything that they had been bringing into the temple, and it's piled up in heaps all around the temple, and he gets worried. Hezekiah's like, what did I do? Emery says that to me all the time. I shoot her a look, and Emery will look at me and go, what did I do? And he looks at the priest and he goes, are the people okay? Look at all this stuff. And now look, the response from this priest is epic. He goes, oh, king, you have no idea what's happened, do you? He goes, this is just 10%. Since the people of God have been bringing their tithe into the storehouse, they are so blessed that this is running over their homes that they cannot contain the blessing of God. Can you imagine? He had to add rooms to the temple for all of the things in the storehouse. And it said this, that every nation called them blessed and came to them for supply. Why did that happen? See, what are we saying is, you are the people of God. You're in the house of God. You're bringing these things in. But when the world sees us blessed and not struggling with inflation.
Come on. Hello.
And listen, man, inflation hit me hard. Do you know how much diapers went up? I mean, we started out, diapers were like $29 a box. They went up to like $68 for the same box of diapers over the last 2 years. I mean, you want to talk about getting hit in the wallet, right? But see, here's the thing. No matter what inflation has done, here's what we've said. We will not bend in this area. We will bring the tithe into God's storehouse. And as we bring it in, here's what's happened. God's just kept coming and giving more. Now, let me tell you about tithing for me and my family. Okay, can I take a minute and do this? Okay, now, I had a surgery back in June. The place that I was working stopped paying me in July. I was off work for 6 months. No pay. Nothing. There was not a month that went by, and I didn't tell people that I wasn't making any money. There was not a month that went by that someone that I hadn't talked to for 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, didn't call me and say, the Lord told me that I'm supposed to give you $2,000. The Lord told me I'm supposed to give you $5,000. I had one guy call me in the middle of the night. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. He called me. I wanted to choke this guy through the phone. He said, don't hang up. I got a word from God. I said, say it quick. He said, the Lord told me to give you $10,000. I said, let the Lord lead you. There was not 1 month I did not make my house payment. There was not 1 month I didn't pay an electric bill. There was not 1 month I didn't have food on the table. There was not 1 month that I looked at my finances, and you know what? When I walked away from that 6 months, I had more money in the bank than when I started. Why? Because the protection of God was rebuking the devourer for my sake. Why? Because I refused to bend in that area no matter what came. No matter what came. No matter what came. That wasn't optional for me. Why am I going to give the enemy the opportunity to curse me? That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. I'm doing real good. I'm blessed. Why don't you come on over here and curse me real quick? There's a principle here I don't want you to miss. This is personal. This is personal. This affects everything else in your life. Let me get my guys to come up here. I'm going to give you an example. Can I give you an example of this? Okay. So I got some money here. Don't they look handsome today? Look at these guys. These are men of valor. Go ahead, let's line up. All right. So, here's how I'm going to describe this. I got some money here, okay? And I need to go on a missions trip. And it's going to be quite a long time, okay? And I'm going to make sure that Kristen and Emery are taken care of while I'm away. I'm going to a very remote place. These people have never heard the gospel. It's going to take a while to lay some groundwork, to build some churches, to do some things. I'm going to be away for a little while. So I have some money set aside for them, and that's all good. But I want to make sure that they're taken care of, and somebody's looking over them, making sure that something as good is happening. So here's what I'm going to do. These are 3 men of valor. These men love me. They're faithful people. They serve God in this house so well. I can't even begin to tell you how grateful I am for these 3 men. These men, when you look at them, you should be looking and seeing, look, there goes Jesus. That's what Jesus looks like. This is what Jesus looks like. Every time you walk through a door, it's because this guy showed up and got his team ready. And every time I'm up here to preach, it's because this man has served like you would not believe on a Sunday morning. Before I ever got up here, the last thing he does on Sunday morning is put this stuff up here. And you get a guy like this. Do you realize who this man is? You don't. You have no idea who Cliff is. If I told you this man's story, it would blow your mind. There is nothing that I've ever looked at Cliff and said, Cliff, can you help me out, man? He says, sure, Pastor, no problem at all. He's been so faithful in this house. So I want to bless them. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to give each one of these guys $10,000. Okay? Don't get too excited. It's fake money. All right? So I got some movie prop money. It looks really real, but it's not, okay? I don't have All right, so $10,000 each. Here's what I'm going to ask each one of you to do for me, okay? Every month that I'm away, you're going to get $10,000 wired into your account. I want you to give $1,000 to my wife, Kristen, every month. Will you do that for me? Okay, so as this happens, they're going to give Kristen $1,000 every month. And they can do whatever they want with the other $9,000. It's theirs. I just want to bless them because I love them. Okay, now, I call Kristen 3 months into this and say, hey, I just want to check. These guys sending this money, is it getting to you okay? And she says, oh, well, you know what, Cliff? He sends me $1,000 on the first of every month. It's like clockwork. I just know it's going to be there. I said, great. I said, how about Tony? Oh, Tony, even better. He's been giving me $2,000 a month. I said, I only asked him for $1,000. Why is he giving you $2,000? I don't know, but he says it's just his honor and his privilege because he can't take all this money. And then Chance. What happened with him? Well, you know what? The first month he sent me $700. And then the next month he sent me $300. And this month he didn't send me anything at all. Now, what am I going to do with him? What do I do? This is hard because I love Chance. But now I can't trust Chance because you know what these guys are telling me? They're telling me how much they love me. They're telling me how much I matter. They're telling me how much they love my wife and my family and what they're willing to do to help them and protect them. They're telling me how much they value me by doing this with my money, not theirs. And they can keep the rest. Here's what happens. I can't give this to him anymore. Why not? Because I can't trust him with it. And I need to make sure because I got to take care of my bride. So I'm going to give this money to these guys. And I'm going to let them take care of it and steward it. Why? Because I know that it's going to work the way I intended. And I can bless that. See, here's the thing. Didn't Jesus say, I'm going away for a little while? But I'm coming back. And let me remind you that the church is the bride of Christ. This is personal for Jesus, just like it's personal for me, because if Chance doesn't give that money to my wife, I'm going to take that very personally. Why? Because this was all about provision for my family and my home, and I wanted to bless them in the process.
Excellent. Yes.
It's that simple. You guys can have a seat. This is what it's all about. Because listen, I'm coming to you this morning, and just like Hezekiah, I've been reading the scriptures. And some of you are so new, you've never heard this before. And you need to know, I'm not up here because I want your money. Don't need it. God takes care of me every day. God takes care of this house every day. But I want you to be blessed. I want you to walk in the fullness of everything that God's called you to have and what He's called you to do. And today we need to tear down some high places that say that we're going to go ahead and offer, because some of us worship MasterCard. Some of us worship the mortgage company. Some of us mortgage and we go ahead and worship the car dealership because we need to pay them so we can have what we want.
Yeah, that's right. There you go.
But today what I'm going to ask you to do is to search your heart. And if you haven't been following the principle, it's time to start, because I want to see you blessed. I've only ever heard 2 testimonies from tithing. People who tithe look at me and say, Pastor, I'm so blessed. I'm just so blessed. And people who don't tithe say, I can't afford to tithe. You'll never be able to afford to tithe until you do. One time I had a job. It was really good. I worked in banking for a little while. Just a part-time job that ended up causing about 6 promotions for me in a couple of years. I was following biblical principles in banking. I wouldn't sell people debt. I sold people tools to get them out of debt. And I was like making the bank millions of dollars. In 1 quarter, I made my bank $64 million in the worst branch in the whole country, because I was fasting and praying and asking God what to do. And He would just bring people in. I mean, it was crazy what God was doing. I got an offer to go be a professor at Oral Roberts University. The amount of money that they offered me would not have even been close to my tithe. on what the bank had offered me to stay. But God had told me to go. And I knew his voice, and I knew that all of the blessings and everything, if I stepped out of his will, it wasn't going to follow me where I was. And so I went to ORU for this very small amount of money. And I said, okay. And I started doing my finances, and I went to the Dave Ramsey route of all this, right? I got the cash out of the bank. I got the envelopes. I started putting them all on the table, and I started filling them all in to be able to pay all my bills. And I would put all my money in, and I kept coming up about $100 short, no matter what I did. And I realized that I had not pulled my tithe out. So I emptied all the envelopes. I put my tithe in first. And then, you know what? I ended up with $10 left over. I can't explain it to you other than, man, maybe bills were stuck together. I dumped it all back out again, did the exact same thing, and it worked out again. So I said, So I dumped it out, and I started putting them all, and I left the tithe out. I was $100 short. I can't explain that to you. But I can explain this to you. When God puts an ordinance in front of us and said, this is ordinary behavior from my people, if we walk in it, the blessing of God flows and it comes onto our life. Now let me tell you what else happened. God told me to give that extra $10 as an offering, as seed in the ground for something. And I said, God, I need more money. But I know I'm here on your word. I put that money in and I sowed that seed. And guess what happened? The university called in their board of trustees that year. And what was supposed to be a cost of living increase over the next 5 years, year by year by year, they decided to give us all at once that entire 5 years. And not only did I have enough money, but I got to give more. I'll be excited about that. That was awesome. This stuff works, I'm telling you. And how can I tell you that? Because I'm living it. And I want you to live it with me. Are you ready? We're going to take the offering. If the ushers want to get ready, I'm going to give you a chance. We didn't take it earlier because I wanted to give you some principles so that you could do it the right way. Okay? So listen, if you want to give by check, you can make it out to Victory Church. If you want to give by debit card or you want to give online, you could do that several ways. The first way is you could text Victory Denver, give to 94,000. It'll help you set it up right there. I do text to give. I think it's the most amazing, easy thing in the world. I give in about 30 seconds and I never have to worry about whether or not it came through. Okay? If you want to put cash or something in an envelope, make sure you fill it out, put it in those buckets because God wants to bless you, and I want to see you walk in that blessing. Are you ready to break the curse? Stand on your feet with me if you would. Hold your offering in your hand. I'm going to give you time to prepare. And listen, if you didn't come prepared for this today, it's okay. I understand. But here's what I'm going to ask you to do. In your heart right now, I want you to say this to the Lord. Lord, I hear you. I understand the ordinance, and I'm going to do my very best, and I don't want you to sit on this, okay? Don't sit on this. Get it done however you need to do it because I can't wait to see what the testimony is. I'm going to share a testimony with you next week that will blow your mind, okay? Are you ready for this? Let me pray for you. Father, I thank you for every person in this room. I thank you for the seed that's in their hand. Every tither, I thank you that you would bless them till their cup runs over. God, I thank you for every person in this room under the sound of my voice. I ask, God, that you would speak to them, help them to walk in your word in every way so that they can walk in an abundant life. God, we give you glory for it. We thank you for it. In the name of Jesus, we pray.
Don't miss out on the blessings that God has in store for you. He wants to bless you and bless you abundantly. As Pastor Cyprowski mentioned at the end of the sermon, if you want to be part of giving, you can text Victory Denver Give to 94,000. That will take you straight to the webpage, which shows you all the different ways you can set up online giving, give by text, and so much more. Again, thank you so much for being part of Victory Church and pouring back into the church and into God's kingdom. We hope to see you Sundays at 10 a.m. in person or right back here at Victory Church Online. Have a great week.